I will bathe this world in blood! Impressive, but futile. Inevitable! Swift death! You will know pain! Swift death! Fun.
Yo, what's up everyone? It's me again. Welcome back to another video. So in this video, I wanted to talk about this build that I've been working on off stream and on stream. And this is a Splitting Steel Deadeye that does not use any uniques that I do believe is 100% SSF viable. And as you saw in the segment earlier, it is T17 viable. You can do T17s with it. It can kill, the mobs and the boss, but, it is a little bit squishy just due to being a Deadeye. So maybe not the most optimal T17 farmer, but my main idea with this build was just to see if I could create a SSF viable, no unique Splitting Steel Deadeye character that had, relatively good performance and was mainly just good at farming T16s pretty fast, which this build is good at that. And incidentally, it also can do T17s if they're on the easier side, although you may die a couple times in that. But yeah, that was the main idea of this build. There's not going to be like a build guide video specifically, but more just a video talking about a build that I've been working on and, just talking about the pros and cons and the thought process that came into making this build. So yeah, let's just get into it. So yeah, I've always liked Splitting Steel. This is a skill for anyone who doesn't know. You shoot out one projectile and then you get some sort of returning projectiles behavior. Here I'm using returning projectiles support, and this makes it so that all the things that split off of the additional projectile will return to me and kind of just splash in a giga area around my character. And with increased area of effect support, the idea is that you maximize the number of overlaps in these explosions so that if you're standing on top of an enemy, you can get a large amount of hits per attack. And in this build is getting a total of 12 hits per attack. So that's like the main way that you scale the damage of this build. You have one from the original projectile that you shoot out, and without a Nimbus, you can guarantee that this original projectile will hit. And then Splitting Steel on a gem has 5 additional projectiles. Sniper's Mark with the mark effect from the Deadeye Ascendancy gives 1 more projectile, and then you have +2 from the Deadeye Ascendancy node, and then you have +1 from the multi-shot notable in the tree. And all this results in 12 hits per attack if they all shotgun, and I have a note here saying that you need increased AoE scaling to ensure shotgunning. So that's the main idea of this build, is to scale physical damage and crit and some impale to maximize the damage given this returning projectiles mechanic. And yeah, so I was kind of interested in seeing if I could make this build work, first of all without uniques in SSF, and second of all given all the changes that Splitting Steel has received over the last couple of patches. So I guess first, let's talk about uniques. So in order to play this build, you need a couple of different things. The first is you need a source of returning projectiles. You can either use returning projectile support or a Nimbus. Using a Nimbus would triple your damage, which I think is pretty bad game design. It's just that using Nimbus means that you don't need to use this gem, which has a giga less damage multiplier on it when the projectiles return. And in addition, not only do you not have to deal with the less damage multiplier, but you also can replace returning projectile support with another gem, so you can get an extra link. So using Nimbus would result in a huge amount of more damage, 3 times more, which is completely silly in my opinion. It's just that the idea of farming Nimbus and SSF is a little crazy right now, The div card is extremely rare, and it only drops now from Uber Eater, which is like, good luck dropping an Nimbus from Uber Eater in SSF. So in SSF, you basically have to run returning projectiles for this build. There's also another way to get returning projectiles as well, and that way is to use a sword and then craft the returning projectiles rune-smithing enchantment, which is, really overpowered, and you can definitely play this build with a two-handed sword and it would be really good. Unfortunately, 15 power runes is just a totally prohibitive cost, and I've been no-lifing this game since League start, and I only have 2 power runes. Well, technically 3, maybe 4 if I vendor everything, but the idea of farming 15 power runes in SSF is completely ludicrous, so that's also not viable in SSF. But yeah, other than that, there's not really any way to get returning projectiles other than running this gem. So here I have this. And then there's also some other uniques that are really good for this build as well. Most notably this Bell Timbers blade. And this is really good for this build because it lets you fire 2 additional projectiles, which increases your damage due to the shotgunning. And also it gives you far shot. And however, there's a couple of problems with using this. The first problem is that the damage is just not that good on this item. And the second thing that's not ideal is that with the changes to Splitting Steel in the recent patch, you can kind of see that they removed the flat damage roll, the flat damage roll on Splitting Steel, and they compensated that by increasing the added damage effectiveness, which, same pattern as all the other buffs this league. But the change was not really that good for this particular gem. Other gems got a lot more buffs. This one, the numbers on this buff are just not very good. Losing the flat damage was really bad for the skill, because this skill had a lot of flat damage, and in general it's pretty hard to get added physical damage. It's a lot easier to add elemental damage. So yeah, I feel like using this, first of all, you have to drop this in SSF, which is pretty rare. Usually I don't see this item too often just playing the game in SSF. But even if you did have this, you would still lose a lot of flat damage, and it's just, I'm not sure that this is really necessarily optimal. However, in SSF, it turns out that without this item, you can just play the Deadeye Ascendancy, which gives you far shot. Literally, there's a node called far shot, and you get +2 projectiles from endless munitions. So that kind of makes up for not using Bell Timbers. In addition, if you use Bell Timbers, you have to kind of have your damage carried by a Paradoxica for the double damage. And the problem with Paradoxica, well, there's 2 problems with Paradoxica. The first problem is that, it's very difficult to get a good Paradoxica in SSF. I got only 1 this league, and it just wasn't a good roll. So, and that's the only one I got. It's I would never farm an Paradoxica in SSF. That'd just be crazy. But the other problem is that if you dual wield swords, not only do you lose out on the flat added damage aspect, but you also can't use rage efficiently. And rage was also something that was changed in this patch, which made a lot of builds more powerful. Basically, 30 rage now allows you to have 30% more attack damage. However, most of the sources of rage in this game are rage on melee hit, right? All these nodes only give you rage on melee hit. So to use a projectile skill like Splitting Steel, which does not have a melee component, and make it give rage, allow it to gain rage, you have to basically use an axe. And this is also kind of interesting because if you take this axe mastery here, you can get 2 rage on hit with axes, and then if you anoint Slaughter, that's an additional 1 rage on hit with axes. So that in total gives you 3 rage on hit with axes, meaning that you can gain 6 rage a second. So in 5 seconds, you can ramp up to maximum rage, which will give you 30% more attack damage. So I do believe that all these changes, the rage, the loss of flat added physical damage to the gem, and the increase of effectiveness of added damage, all of these factors kind of push this build into using a 2-handed axe, because with a two-handed axe, you can gain rage, and you can also get a lot of flat damage. In addition, with a two-handed axe, you can use an axe called Flesh Ripper, which gives you a 50% increased critical strike chance, which is local. And with this, you can really effectively scale your crit. Like this weapon, I think is like a tier 1 crit chance roll explicit modifier. And I have a 9.3 base crit chance on this axe. So like I can scale crit, I can scale rage, I can get a large amount of damage for my, for my gem. And it just seemed really good to use this. And Splitting Steel also has a problem where you kind of run out of support gems to use after a certain point. Like you have Brutality, which is good, Vicious Projectiles, Returning Projectiles, and then Area of Effect. But like the last link is like, it's pretty hard to find a link that's like super good. You would never use Concentrated Effect, and everything else is just kind of not that strong. So without crit, you kind of run out of like efficient supports. So I decided to build this build with crit, and it's like, a pretty normal way to build this. The other alternative would be Precise Technique, but I think crit just has a lot better scaling with this build. So yeah, that's the main idea. Two-handed axe gives you a lot of damage and also rage generation. And then you also get access to some pretty good axe nodes as well. You get Hatchet Master, which was moved very close to the ranger start location. So this gives you onslaught and kill in addition to a lot of damage and attack speed. And you can also get this wheel over here, which gives you accuracy and crit multi and damage. So some of these axe nodes are actually like pretty good. And then, the other axe mastery that you can get is enemies are destroyed, which, is pretty good. You can like kill porcupines with it, avoid, a lot of, on death effects, which are kind of annoying. So yeah. And that's basically the main idea of this build. Two-handed axe, Splitting Steel Deadeye without uniques. And I think it worked pretty good. It did take a lot of like iterations and like, working on this build to get it to this point. My initial first version of this used a lightning coil because I thought that, you wouldn't have very much fizz mit without lightning coil. But it turns out that like someone in my Twitch chat recommended that I try out another way of building, which was around high evasion and Wind Dancer. And if you have high enough evasion with Wind Dancer, the main idea is that if you get hit infrequently, you can take advantage of the 20% less attack damage taken if you've been hit by an attack recently. And I think this may actually be better than Lightning Coil because more evasion means that you get hit less, which makes mapping better. In addition, Wind Dancer protects you against big elemental hits, whereas Lightning Coil only protects you against physical hits. So yeah, I ended up like playing this build for like 50% of the time with a coil setup and then 50% with the Wind Dancer setup. And I do think that the Wind Dancer setup actually was a little bit better. It felt like I was getting hit less and that I was surviving more. So I decided to like change from coil to Wind Dancer. And another benefit of going Wind Dancer is that you can get a Giga rare chest. And, there's just like, a chest like this, which has like suppression and allows you to take the 15% life mastery because it has no life mods. And you get 2 Eldritch Implicits, which gives you damage. And you can get res, which means that you can have a much easier time capping res. And you can drop Purity of Elements to get grace. Like the power that a good rare chest gives you, I feel is, pretty good. And it kind of makes me think that Lightning Coil may actually be a little overrated. Maybe not for like hardcore, but I'm a, softcore SSF player. So it just seems like something like this gives you a lot more value than Lightning Coil does, especially when paired with Wind Dancer. And this is not even like the optimal base as well. Like you could use a Syndicate Garb, which is the optimal like evasion base now in 3.25, and apparently you can get like 4,000 evasion if you roll it like really good. So this is like not even optimal. But yeah, just the power that you can get from like a rare chest, it feels like very high right now. So that was interesting. Other than that, that's basically the idea of the build. You guys take some axe nodes, you take some crit nodes, You try to scale your number of projectiles using your Deadeye Ascendancy, multi-shot, Sniper's Mark. That was actually something that I was concerned with as well, because Sniper's Mark got nerfed in 3.24 as Necropolis. I don't know why. I think Sniper's Mark was fine. I don't like that they nerfed it. They nerfed the damage of it, and they also nerfed the projectiles that split out from it. It used to be 4, and then if you got 75% mark effect with Deadeye, for instance, you could make this like 3 additional projectiles. So like Sniper's Mark on Deadeye previously could give you 7 projectiles, like, you know, returning for Splitting Steel. But now that they nerfed the base split to 2, you know, like with 75% mark effect, it doesn't really do anything. So you just have to go for the 50% mark effect, which gives you 3. So you basically lost 4 projectiles for no reason, which I think is kind of cringe. Like if I had 4 additional projectiles in this build, my damage would go from 17 mil to like 23 mil, right? For like no reason at all. So yeah, I'm not too happy with that nerf. I don't think it was the right nerf. I think they should have nerfed Nimbus, because I think Nimbus is the problem, right? Like the fact that you can put on 1 ring and increase your damage by 3 times, I think is really bad game design. Like if they would nerf anything, they should nerf Nimbus and not, you know, Splitting Steel or Sniper's Mark, in my opinion. So yeah, but you know, it is what it is. So yeah, but that's the main idea of this build, just axe, crit, number of projectiles. Movement speed is just leap slam, faster attacks. You can even put a momentum link in there as well, Frostblink. And then for the aura setup, I ended up going with Pride, Grace, Flesh and Stone. And then Arrogance, Precision for the crit chance and accuracy, and just normal stuff. They did change Flesh and Stone to allow enemies to take more physical damage. So, you know, it's just a good damage multiplier. It's like 3.4 million damage in my PoE, so it is very good. It's like half a Pride. And then Grace, mostly just to help with Wind Dancer and just staying alive. I don't like running the new Grace because, you know, it got nerfed a lot, but it still feels like it is mandatory. Like if you don't have this, you just can't use Wind Dancer. And I am kind of starting to feel like Wind Dancer High Evasion is better than Coil. So yeah. And then Sniper's Mark just for the damage and the projectile count. Custom damage taken Steel Skin, just put a guard skill in there somewhere. And then I did end up doing 2 things that I've never thought of before. The first one is this Bladestorm link. So this Bladestorm link, I kind of just ended up calling this like Ancestral Bladestorm. And the main idea is that with Sniper's Mark, you can't run Assassin's Mark. And that means it's very difficult to generate power charges in this build. So by taking advantage of Bladestorm, which is a melee skill that scales off of like, you know, all of your melee stuff. For example, you know, if you use a melee skill like this, it will benefit from like the crit chance of your weapon and whatnot. And so you use a melee skill like this that hits a lot of times. You use power charge on crit and increase critical strikes so that you can crit a lot with Bladestorm. And then that allows you to generate a lot of power charges. So I was basically just like dropping this down on single target just to get power charges. And then you can also put Culling Strike on it as well. And if you're fighting like an Essence or a boss, just like put this underneath it and sometimes it'll cull. But mostly this is just for like generating power charges on like a single target. It's not the most important link ever, but I do feel like it gives a very tangible benefit. Like if you drop a couple Bladestorms, you will be at 3 power charges just like instantly. So I found that to be very useful. And then the other thing that I decided to take advantage of was the new tinctures. And this is also something that, you know, I'm not too happy with the way that this is implemented. I wish that tinctures were like either a permanent buff that was like always on, rather than like something you have to press. It really does feel like another melee totem. You know, it's like we lost Ancestral Protector, but now there's just like, you know, you have to press Ancestral Tincture now, which is why I named my character Ancestral Tincture. Just like, look at what happens if I take this off, right? My damage is 17 million. If I take it off, I go down to 9 million. So like this tincture alone gives me like double damage almost from 9 mil to 17 mil. And the reason it's so crazy is just that like the implicit is like 200% crit chance, but you can amplify that by rolling the increased effect prefix on it. So this tincture has 241% increased crit chance, and then also 35% attack speed as well. So like that's like such a huge amount of power, and like it lasts for a very long time too. Especially if you take the tincture mastery, which gives you first 6 mana burn have no effect. So like if I use my tincture like right now, well, I don't know if it'll go down because I'm in hideout, but like, is it gonna go down? So like it goes down like that. So like even if I don't attack, it lasts for like, 10 seconds. But when I am attacking, it lasts for even longer because I have instant mana leech. So if I'm like hitting one target, it'll last for a very long time. So I went out of my way to, I almost said out of my mind. I went out of my way to like get more mana reservation efficiency just so I could like have 131, just like free mana. And I don't need that mana for my mana sustain, but it's just for the tincture because it gives me so much damage to have this on. It really is silly. I hate pressing it. It doesn't give any cool visual effect or anything. It's just like a button you have to press, otherwise you're going to lose half of your damage. It just makes no sense. I don't like the way that tinctures are implemented right now. I think it is messed up. But, I mean, pressing a button to gain double damage, you kind of just feel like you're forced to do it. So, unfortunately, this build does use Ancestral Tincture and, to a lesser extent, Ancestral Bladestorm. But yeah, that's basically the main idea. And between the Ancestral Tincture and this new crit wheel here, which is also totally silly, it's very easy to hit 100% true crit chance on a build like this using an axe on Deadeye. You can hit 100% crit chance like without a diamond flask. It's just that, you have so much crit chance from the tincture, and then Flesh Ripper has good base crit, and then also with this new Cornered Prey wheel, you have like so much added crit chance and multi against bleeding enemies. And with 20% chance to bleed and 12 projectiles per attack, the enemy will basically instantly be bleeded if you attack for like, 1 or 2 times. Because, you have so many projectiles. So, yeah, it's like with all this crit help and, axe and then rage, you can end up with a very large amount of damage. And, in my POB, if all the hits overlap and I cull and my tincture is up and my power charges are up and my frenzies are up from the Mark Mastery, like if everything is up, I can hit 17 million damage. And as you can see, like the T17 boss died pretty fast there, so yeah, that's basically this build. It is kind of a glass cannon overall though, mostly because it's just a Deadeye and, you can't really get too much survivability on a character like this. You're just very limited in like how much mitigation you can get on this archetype. So, the build has Wind Dancer, 33k evasion. With this current setup, if you press the Jade Flask, it goes up to 44k evasion, and then if you have Wind Dancer, it goes up a little more. Of course, the best upgrade would probably be a Evasion Watcher's Eye. I'm not sure why the Evasion Watcher's Eye even exists, but like, gaining flat evade chance on top of like 81, 85 would just be, insane. But I didn't happen to get one this league, and I don't really want to farm Elder because it's boring and there's too many phases, so I'm just gonna leave the build as is like this. But yeah, the defenses are basically just like, in some instant leech, 33k evasion, 100% spell suppression of course, and then, Wind Dancer for a little bit of less damage taken, which would scale more the more evasion you got on this build. And that's basically it. And then I guess to a lesser extent, 25% less damage taken from enemies near your marked enemy. Kind of useless, but mostly just for like a little bit of defense and mapping. And, 4.5k life at level 96 if you take the 6% life nodes. And that's basically it, That's basically what you got on this build. I would define this build as a high damage, a situationally high damage SSF viable glass cannon type of build. So yeah, Yeah, that's basically it. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory, just life nodes and stuff. Reservation wheel. You can take the mana mastery here for additional reservation efficiency. I went with this node instead of this wheel instead of this wheel here because Revelry gives you a non-curse aura effect, which benefits your Pride and Flesh and Stone. So it's just like a little bit of free damage. You could also take Thrill of Battle, but I think Revelry is better for this build. But yeah, that's about it. And then the gear is pretty straightforward as well. I'm not sure why these common items are here. Probably leveling stuff in offhand. But yeah, you know, the gear is pretty straightforward. You know, just tincture with crit chance implicit and melee weapon attack speed. That's basically it. I have heard that if you have a level 85 tincture, you can get tier 1 mods. I don't even know if mine is level 85. Oh, mine is level 69, so I only have tier 2. Like, if you had like a level 85 tincture, you can make it like tier 1 mods on it, which would give you even more damage on the ancestral tincture. I actually have a level 85 rose thorn tincture. I'm just too lazy to roll it. But yeah, you should definitely use a level 85 one if you can. You can drop them pretty frequently, just like in T16s or like sometimes in T17s as well. But that's basically it. Other flasks, just a life flask with bleed immune, you know, quartz flask with some crit chance just for mapping, even though you don't really need it. Quicksilver with movement speed and jade with evasion. That's basically it. And then the weapon, it's very important for this weapon to have very high base crit chance. So like ideally you would use like the crit chance essence until you got some good fizz rolls, and then you would just try to get the more, you know, just more fizz rolls on there. But you can basically craft this axe however you want with whatever essence spam, you know, maybe even ROG if you get lucky. It doesn't have to be a warlord item. It's only warlord because I had an open suffix and I warlord exalted slammed it trying to get a physical damage roll, but I failed and I got weapon range, which is completely useless for this build, but whatever. But yeah, the main idea is just to get a high PDPS crit axe. In a perfect world, you would also get crit multi on this, but I just couldn't get that in SSF, so whatever. Flesh Ripper is the optimal base because it has the highest crit chance. And then for the runesmithing enchantment, I went with 23% increased physical damage. It's a 21 to 25 roll, so you know I just got in the middle of there. But you know this axe of course could be better, but it is what it is. You know, good enough for me. And then the rest of the gear is pretty straightforward. Just try to get as much suppression as you can. You're not particularly tight on suppression for this build. Like I'm not even using the 15% spell suppression evasion mastery just because I ended up overcapping anyway. So like you don't really need suppression like that much on this build. I guess I could take off these 2 skill points and then take the evasion mastery, but these 2 skill points give you like movement speed as well. It doesn't really matter too much either way. But yeah, the main idea is you're not too tight on suppression on this build. You just want to make sure you get the new optimal evasion bases, which is Majestic Pelt, Valor Gloves, Valor Boots, and Syndicate Garb. I was too lazy to find a Syndicate Garb at level 85, so I just decided to use this, which I got from like ROG, I think. I don't even know. Maybe I hasn't spammed it. Don't remember. But yeah, just get like some good evasion suppression gear. The more suppression, the better. Saves you skill points, and the more evasion is also better as well, mostly because of Wind Dancer. It's just that the more evasion you get, the more value Wind Dancer will give you. So just try to get as much evasion as you can, and then just like life and res. You know, if you can have attack speed on the gloves, that's good as well. And then I decided to go with, you know, just what I call as like scuffed ailment immunity. Use craft chill shock on the boots, take Brine King and Garricon Pantheons, and that helps you get like shock, 100% reduced effective shock, 90% reduced effective chill, and usually that's good enough for me in SSF. I feel like I do this in every build at this point, so yeah, I just have that. And then for the implicits, you can just get whatever. movement speed on the boots is nice to scale with Deadeye's Tailwind. The gloves, I feel like it has to be these two implicits. It's just that without this Pierce, the clear feels kind of bad, so I ended up just taking Pierce as my Eater implicit, and then Intimidate as my Exarch implicit. It's just that without a Rage Wheel, it's pretty difficult to get Intimidate on this build, even though you don't really need it. Intimidate is not that good because you already have a lot of increased damage taken between your Mark Mastery, Sniper's Mark, Pride, and Blood and Flesh and Stone. So Intimidation only really gives you like 800k more damage. You don't need it, but it's just free damage. So I decided to get that on the implicit because it wasn't really convenient to get it anywhere else. And then for the body armor, I decided to go with Pride Effect and non-curse auras just for the damage. You could also go for like crit multi with attacks, I think you can also get, but the non-curse auras I feel like is really good. It scales your grace, which is good for a Wind Dancer, and it also scales your damage as well, so I just went with this. And then for the helmet, I think it also has to be these two implicits. The reduced mana cost really helps offset the giga increased mana costs that you got this patch, like previously it was, well actually Splitting Steel only went from 8 to 11, so that's not even that much of an increase, but it just helps a lot. And the lower you can get your mana cost, the better uptime your tincture will have as well. So, definitely go for that. And then the reservation efficiency is really only there for the tincture uptime as well. Other than that, it's just like life chaos res, pretty normal stuff. Then this is the amulet that I ended up using. It's mostly just, life and crit. That's basically it. Life, crit chance, crit multi, and then minus cost. I ended up having to go with 3 minus cost crafts on all my jewelry. Again, just for the reduction of the insanely high mana costs now, and also for tincture uptime. I do feel like it's, very important to get triple minus cost on this build. Well, that's whatever. And then if you happen to get a little bit of added physical damage, that's of course also nice. But as you can see here, it doesn't really give you that much damage. Like adding 4 to 10 physical damage is only 200k in PoB, 200k DPS, so not that important. Much more important to have life and res. This ring's actually pretty bad because it only gives me 35 life. I should probably make a new ring. Also, you ideally want to be using amethyst rings. I just happened to have this 2-stone ring that was like kind of nice, so I used it. But ideally, you would have like amethyst rings with chaos res and really high life rolls, and then open prefix for minus cost on this build. And then for the belt, I decided to go for a heavy belt just for strength. I ended up having some difficulties like getting enough strength to use all the stuff that I wanted to use. Like Pride is 155 strength, and being a Deadeye, you don't really get that much strength, even though you do kind of go over here to the strength side of the tree. So I decided to go with a suboptimal heavy belt just to get that strength roll. But you also could probably just use like a Stygian Vice and get like multi on it or something, and then like just try to get like a big roll of strength on the suffix as well. That would probably be equally good, honestly. So yeah, heavy belt is easier to use, but Stygian Vice is probably more optimal if you're trying to min-max. And that's basically the build. And then anointment, as I mentioned before, is slaughter. You do want to use an agate amulet for the strength and int, but yeah, slaughter is really important because going from 2 rage per hit to 3 rage per hit is big value. And also you get a nice amount of damage and attack speed with this anointment, and it's super cheap. It's just 3 blues, 3 azures. So yeah, and that's basically the main idea of the build. Deadeye, Tailwind, go fast, far shot, projectiles, axe, crit, suppression, Wind Dancer, evasion, AoE, returning projectiles, and that's basically it. Cool. Wow, this video was under an hour. I'm going to link this POB in the description of this video in case you're curious and want to check it out. I'm not sure that I could recommend this build because even with all of this, it does feel a little squishy. As you can see, I was able to do a T17 with it, but if you play this build, you kind of have to play very fast, and sometimes you will just die if there's like a lot of like difficult enemies on the screen in like a 8-mod map or whatever. And you know, in more difficult invitations like, you know, Elder Slayers, you could die as well. You know, it's just the nature of being a Deadeye, I guess. You know, especially because you have to be on top of the enemy to get the optimal damage with this build. So I'm not sure I can recommend this build. I think it is okay. Like the damage is definitely there, as you can see. And like for a T16 Map Blaster, it's pretty good. And it can do like easier T17s and like easy bosses it can do. But I'm not sure I can recommend this because I think there are better options available in the meta right now that will give you like maybe a little less damage, but a lot more survivability, which gives you a lot more peace of mind. So yeah. But that being said, you know, I still had like some fun playing this build, and you know, I just thought I'd make a video, kind of just talk about the thought process that went into a build like this. And yeah, at the end of the day, Splitting Steel, SSF Viable, at a reasonable level of power, without uniques, no Nimbus, no Bell Timbers, no Paradoxica. Yeah. Oh, I guess another thing I forgot to talk about was Impale. So they did add a lot of new Impale nodes to the tree in 3.25 in plane. Nice. There are like a lot of new Impale wheels. Like, you know, Forceful Skewering now is here. Savage Skewering is now here. There's one here, and then there's one here as well. But I found that these wheels were just really bad. They're just not very efficient. I was thinking about this kind of like in abstract terms, and like going from 0 to 100% impale chance is the same thing as going from 200 crit multi to 300 crit multi. They both result in 50% more damage overall. But one of those is much easier than the other, right? It's a lot easier to get 100 multi from 200 to 300 than it is to get 100% impale chance. So, I mean, that's not exactly a perfect comparison because you also have impale effect, but that's like the main idea. It's just that I found these impale wheels to be very inefficient. For example, this is like 1 point for 2% attack speed and 5% impale chance, which is like so bad value. And also the impale masteries suck. You know, this is like 1 point for 6% impale effect. That's so bad. You know, 1 point for 10% impale chance. Like, what is this? So I just found these impale nodes to be kind of cringe and very underpowered. I think they need to be buffed a lot. Like, in order for impale to be like a powerful way to scale, it needs a lot of like buffs, in my opinion. Because at this point, impale is basically just like, if you happen to have a little bit of it, it's like a little bit of free damage. Like if you can craft like Fizz Impale in your weapon, that's a little bit of free damage. If you have a gem like Splitting Steel, which naturally has some impale in it, like 40% impale chance and impale effect, like if you have just like very efficient natural ways of getting a little bit of impale, it's like a little bit of like a supplementary damage, but that's about it. You know, I would not recommend scaling impale on this build just because of how underpowered impale scaling currently is right now. But you know, you do have a little bit of impale on this build, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's basically it. And yeah, I'll put the POB in the video in the description in case you're curious about this build. It is a pretty interesting, you know, high damage glass cannon build for like T16 blasting, but yeah, don't expect this to be like the most godlike build ever. It can do T17s, but you'll probably die a couple times. So yeah, there's that. All right, so that's gonna be the end of the video. And I guess I'll leave you guys with just like some footage. I'm gonna like do this Minotaur map, and then I'll do like an Eater as well, just to like get some more footage of how the build works in like a map environment. So yeah, I'm gonna mute my mic and like do these for content, and then I'll end the video, and that'll be it. All right, see you guys in the next video.
One of my captors felt no emotion. Did not hesitate to inflict pain. Now, all he feels is intense, unstoppable agony.
Those I serve cast their eyes upon an endless, unchanging life, and have never had cause. Without pain,
My mana is gone.
time passes like a tear. Insignificant one for no reason. Then, and down. Now they
I'm not up to that just yet.
Time to up the step.
This is the key to a crucible that stretches. This is not a battle you can win. Virtually